Welcome to the latest episode of Lean in Leander. I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity to sit down with each of the candidates who have thrown their hat in the ring this election cycle as part of the Vote in Leander series here on the podcast. And I hope you'll join me over the next few weeks as we sit down for some casual conversations with the candidates. We'll find out a little bit about who they are, where they're from, and what might motivate them to run for office. We're going to start that process with candidate Steve Haynes, who's running for place 3 on the ballot in May. Here's our conversation from earlier this week. I'm here at the Mason Homestead with Steve Haynes, who is a candidate for City Council this May, place 3, correct?
Right.
All right, place 3. And for those of you who might be fans of the podcast, you'll know that I've interviewed Steve once before. He actually ran the last cycle for a different position. We're going to touch on that and a few other things here and hopefully give you a little bit of insight as to who he is, what he does, and why he's running. So, Steve, thanks a lot. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right. So last time we met, we talked a little bit about your hometown. You're from a smaller town in Ohio.
Right.
And help the people who may not be familiar with that kind of understand where you come from.
Okay. So I am from a small town of roughly 600 people in Ohio. It's one of those towns with one traffic light. You had to drive an hour to see a movie, and before you got home from hanging out with your friends, your mom already knew what you had done. So it was a different lifestyle for Leander in a lot of ways. But at the same time, since I've been here, I guess I moved here in 2016. In many ways, Leander also reminds me of the small town. Granted, it's a city that's growing meteorically, but at the same time, there are still a lot of those small town charms. You can walk down the street and people say hi to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know people. You feel a sense of community here. That's something I really like and something that I hope we can continue into the future.
Yeah, no, definitely. Now, Steve and I discussed this a little bit, and you can go back to the previous episode to look at what he was saying about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it should pretty much track with what we're saying here today. And Steve and I have had the opportunity of working together on the Economic Development Committee currently. And so that full transparency to my audience, we're familiar with each other. I'd say we're probably decent acquaintances at this point.
Right.
Steve was kind enough to invite me to his holiday fiesta, which was very fun. It was a very interesting evening. Definitely enjoyed that. Probably had a little bit too much of the wine that night, but
occupational hazard.
I suppose. But anyway, so I do want you to know that we know each other, and so there'll be some bias in here because we're familiar with each other. But I really want to try to give you, who are watching or listening, a real good sense of who Steve is as a person. And so that's going to be the attempt today. So we talked a little bit about where you're from, and since we've touched on it, you ran before,
right,
and then you dropped out of that race.
I did.
So help people understand what prompted that decision and why you went that direction.
Yeah, so last year for place 4, there were 3 candidates, myself included, and myself and another one of the candidates were concerned that we would split some votes. So we talked a number of times, and I ended up biting the bullet, and I dropped with the plan to run again this year for this spot. I knew it was going to be vacant, and we just made a gentleman's agreement then that I would drop and support him, and here we are today.
Okay, so you could go back and you can look at that race, place 4,
right,
last year. You can see what the results were, and you can kind of figure from there what happened. We won't go too far into that, but I did want to make sure that Steve had the opportunity to at least talk about that, because some people are going to question that. What's good to know about that is that it was, like you said, a gentleman's agreement, and there was no, a concern or collaboration, if you will, between you to affect some sort of result other than, hey, we both have similar ideas.
Right.
Let's not split that vote and give each other or give one of us a better chance at potentially winning.
And the truth, Andrew, is it wouldn't have mattered which one of the 3 of us would have won that race. Any of those possible outcomes, we would have ended up with somebody good in office, and we did.
Yeah, yeah, and it's always. I'm glad you said that because it's a good point. It's a good spot to point out that all of the races are at large, so you're representing the entire city, and this is a politics. Local style politics, I guess I could say. I'm struggling for the word right now.
Well, it's a nonpartisan
there you
race.
go, nonpartisan. God, I don't know why I couldn't think of that.
Oh.
It's a nonpartisan race. So the politics are a little bit different,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still politics. So it's fair to say that there's still some of that going on, and
Yeah.
you're positioning and jockeying for people's support. But what's really interesting about that, and again, I look back at that whole process last year. Is that I agree with you. I think that we ended up with a good representative on the council, and again, since it's a citywide type thing and it's supposed to be nonpartisan, you want to try to get as much of a mix of people as possible. I think that's the intent.
I think you're right, and you mentioned a couple of things there. One, you said that it's citywide, so we actually are representing the entire city. So it's important that while you're always going to have some sort of a bias based on your experience and where you stand on the political spectrum, you've got to be able to put that aside to truly represent the city. And I think our city is just continually moving more and more in that direction.
I would agree.
Because if we were zone-based and you were representing an area of the city, I think things would be different. But since everyone is represented by 7 people, you've got to be able to talk to everyone that's in the city. You've got to be able to learn likes, dislikes, what's important to them, and not just go in there with a preconceived notion of, well, this is what I think. You've got to be open to hearing what people actually care about.
Yeah, no, I would agree. In principle, I think at a point in time, we should look at some sort of zoned representation, maybe a mix. I think that's where I'd be inclined to go personally. Like 4 that were zoned, and then the remaining at large. Yeah, I think that would be. I think that would be fair representation, and it would also give those specific areas a little bit more of a focus. And that's really the only reason that personally I think that would be a good idea, especially when you start to get to 100,000, 150,000 people. It's really, really difficult to do at large at that point, in my opinion. That's just me. I'm humbly submitting.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Just talking to people that are new to the city, they're still feeling their way around. And in a lot of those cases, it would be great to have someone in their area representing the concerns of that area.
Right. I mean, I give the example all the time. I live on the far west side of Leander. And I'm right off of Lakeline and Hero.
Okay.
So everything to the west of me is yet to be determined. Okay. Everything to the north of me, if you look at Lakeline, yet to be determined. However, with that said, again, living where I live, and it's my own backyard, so of course it's my concern. I look at Lakeline from Hero to Mason Hills. And it's a 2-lane road. Now, it looks like it's prepared, or the land is there for it to be able to expand to the 4 lanes that you see the rest of the way down Lakeline. But there's a lot of concern there because there's new subdivisions going in. We're adding on the number somewhere between, I'd say 500 to 750 homes in that space. And I would say that's probably, actually, I know exactly what it is. So it's about a mile.
Okay.
It's about a mile of road, more or less, give or take. So there's some concerns there because you're going to have egress and regress onto that 2-lane highway.
Right.
It curves, so there's a visibility issue.
Well, we wouldn't want it to be easy.
Right? So those are the kinds of things. I'm a little off topic there, but that's what I mean by if you had someone who was representing that specific area or that encompassed that area, they could speak to that one issue. And I'll probably bring it up with all the candidates because I think it's important.
Yep.
So that's my concern, at least right now. I have several, but that's one of them. But anyway, so as we talk about that, one of the things that I always like to try to find out is, what is it that is motivating you to run for council? Help us understand that a little bit.
Yeah, so it really goes back to my upbringing in the small town. My sister and I were just pushed to give back. And even here, this city's been great for me, for my family. We love it here. And this is a great opportunity to give back. And I've been giving back in other ways. I volunteer on a number of boards and commissions, but I think this is a way to just take it a step further. I think at this point in my life, I'm mature enough and measured enough to not have knee-jerk reactions to things like I was known to do when I was younger. And I just think this is a good time for me to take my experience and give back on a bigger stage, if you will.
There's one of the things that we talked about, and truth be told, this is the second time I've met with Steve. I had some technical issues the first interview, so we're doing this over. This is a do-over. And by the way, that first interview, it might be one of those lost episodes I put up later. Who knows? It was great. It was a great conversation. But trying to get to some of those same points, one of the things you brought up the last time we talked was the process of maturation. Okay, learning a little bit more as you get a little bit older.
Right.
No offense intended. We're on the same path, so
Okay.
it's not like there's a big gap here or anything. But you did talk about that, and it was a really nice conversation point, and it's the reason I'm bringing it back up, because you did talk about how, your experience the last time through, even though it's only been a year ago, that you learned a lot from that. So help people understand how that helps you better navigate some of the issues that come up in these types of positions now.
Sure. So last year, to be brutally frank about it, I thought I was ready and prepared to be on council. In the last year, I've spent, obviously another year, volunteering on a number of boards and commissions and foundations here in the city. Learned so much in the last year. More about how the city operates, more about the people here. I truly can admit now that I wasn't ready last year, whereas now I feel fully prepared to do this.
Fully prepared or better prepared?
Yeah, as soon as I said that, I was thinking fully's kind of a push, but much better prepared.
Okay.
Right.
All right, that's fair. I want to make sure give you that chance to correct.
Right.
Yeah, because it is interesting. I mean, you and I have roughly about the same amount of time here in Leander. And I've been here about 4 years. And when I started the podcast, I started this effort, one of my ideas was, and it remains kind of a founding principle, is that as a city like this, it's growing so fast with so many new people. Those new people don't know where to turn. They're like, where do I go for information? Where do I go to, hopefully a trusted source? So I've tried to fill that gap and provide opportunities to have this type of conversation and introduce people in the Vote in Leander series specifically to the candidates on a more personal basis. They're going to have plenty of opportunities to go to your fundraisers and your community events and things of that nature. And they can ask them more pointed, specific political or their own agenda items. They'll ask you that there.
But everything stays on that level of, what do you think about this? What would you do in this situation?
Right. Now with the having had the opportunity to spend some time looking at some of these issues, it does help you understand the complexities far more than the just the casual read in community impact, for instance. I mean, it's nothing against community impact; they do a fantastic job, but it's a 10,000 foot view. It's not granular, and I think it's really important that all of the candidates understand that. And in your case specifically, I've seen it. So I've seen that you've put yourself in a position to learn more about the specifics of how the city works, how the people within the staff of the city work, and how to relate to that. So one of the things that I think is important is, again, a diverse mix of opinions, a diverse mix of experience. What are your thoughts there? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's an area where to be honest, I've been re-educated recently. And I've got to give props to Councilmember Thompson. She actually is the one that was the stimulus for this in my mind. But there was a conversation at a council meeting about compensation for council members. And my knee-jerk reaction to that was, this is a volunteer position. We don't need to do this. But as she was explaining her reasons, one of the things that she said was, we have so many people coming in here, and there's so much knowledge and experience that we may not be tapping into because people can't afford to be on council. Because, to be honest, it does take a lot of time and a fair amount of financial resources, even after elected. Just, you're always going somewhere, you're always doing something. And I got to thinking about that, and she's spot on. We've more than doubled our population in the last 10, 12 years. And all of these people coming in, it would be ridiculous for us to think that they have no new ideas or no experience that we don't have. So we've got to find ways to get them involved.
Yep.
Additionally, I think on the dozen or so city boards and commissions that we have in place, we need to do a better job of outreach, educating people on what each of these boards and commissions do, what's expected as far as everything from attendance to participation to actually getting some things done, and reaching out to new neighborhoods or different groups to try to solicit more people to apply.
I think those are all good points, and it's an interesting perspective where that came from. Having been on the Charter Commission myself, we were responsible for reviewing the charter and making suggestions to City Council as to changes that could be made or improvements that could be made to that document. And if you're not familiar with the charter, I've touched on this before, but it's essentially the living, breathing document that's the governing document for the City of Leander. And built into the charter, there's a 5-year review. Every 5 years, there's a review. Whether that should be every 5 years, it's another conversation, but it's every 5 years. So we did make some recommendations, and actually one of the recommendations we made was for compensation. Not living wage.
Right.
Okay, that's not what we're talking about. When we're talking about compensation, what we're really talking about is more an accommodation for the time spent. Anyone who's in business, whether you're in business for yourself or you work in a larger corporate entity, at a period of time you recognize that your commodity is your time.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? So you start to value or evaluate your time. And we've talked about this before. The commitment to City Council, not only is it a large amount of time, it's a long-term
it is.
amount of time, too. It's 3 years. So, 3 years of bi-monthly meetings, right? Plus, at a minimum. Plus, there's the retreat, and there's other social engagements that you would have, and so you're really committing a lot of your free time back to the city.
Well, again, you're representing the city, so we've got numerous festivals and events, and even things as sad as funerals sometimes that you need to be there to represent for.
Yep. No, I would agree with that. I mean, and so from that perspective, again, learning and understanding that a little bit more as time goes by, you're ready to make that commitment is what you're saying.
I'm making that time commitment now with the numerous boards and commissions that I'm serving on. So Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, the Economic Development Committee, the Baseball and Softball Alliance Advisory Board, all of those, if I'm elected, I will have to give up my seats on those. And those are taking almost as much time as what I would be spending on council now. So it's a trade-off. I'm going to miss those because I really like the work and especially the people on those boards. But again, this is a chance to serve the city in a different way.
Sure. So tell me a little bit about your personal life. Like, what do you do for a living? How do you make a living?
So I'm actually in the software game. I work for a software company that provides facilities software. I'm a senior solution engineer, so basically my job is to mold our software to fill voids and find solutions for state and city government.
Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
So there are a lot of things that will come up at council meetings or in conversations, and I'll be like, oh, I saw that somewhere in Colorado. Or,
right. Oh, that's an interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah. I really didn't know that. That's interesting. I am in a similar arena. I'm surprised we haven't had that conversation before.
Well, we did a little bit last year when we did our first one. We were talking about the the KPIs and the statistical
Oh,
reporting.
yeah.
And,
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. We did touch on that. Okay. Well, I don't remember everything.
oh, I'm not even close.
But I got a lot of stuff on tape, so
oh,
I can always go back and reference. Anyway, well, that's good to know. But my first thought there, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything like that. But some people will look at that and say, well, wait a second, why does he want to be on city council if he's working for a company that does government type of software? Mm-hmm. How do you answer that question?
I just think that it better prepares me. I see the things that go on back office to keep the city running. I'm familiar with those. I've helped other cities implement these solutions. Leander's not looking for software. They're not looking for our software, so there's no conflict of interest there. If anything, I think that Leander's getting a bonus because there are definitely situations that have come up in the last year that I've had insight on from that experience.
I think that's a really great point, and I'm glad you made it in the way that you did, because that's kind of where, the conversation, I want to turn the conversation is to that applied experience. Mm-hmm. That, again, we talked about the diversity of opinions and the diversity of life experience, but it's also about applying that life experience to these scenarios, right, and adding to the conversation. You and I have had the good fortune of, again, we've worked together on the Economic Development Committee for a little bit now. You were already serving when I joined. But what I've seen there is that there have been opportunities where we've invited people in from outside of Leander, right, who have experience with some of the issues that we are trying to address. Right. So I think it makes the point that, that expanse and that network that people have, everyone has their own network of influencers, mm-hmm, or decision makers or whatever the case might be, and being able to pull on some of those resources to help at least inform the process, right, not make decisions. I don't think that's necessarily from my own perspective, I'm not looking to make a decision necessarily. I always look to see, okay, can we bring in some more opportunity to inform ourselves, right, so that we can make a better decision?
And that's a very good point you make there. We've had a couple of people come in from the outside to speak to economic development. Other committees I'm on have done the same thing. In fact, we've got another one potentially on the next meeting that I'm really looking forward to.
Right.
But when I mentioned the maturity, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I thought I knew more than I probably do. So one of the things I've learned, I'll use the word painfully in some cases, is that it's not only okay, it's encouraged to get input from other people. Mm-hmm. So bringing in somebody from, some of the people that have come into economic development as an example, reaching out to people in the city, employees or residents that may know more than I do, just to get enough information to make an informed decision, I think is really important.
Yeah, and I really like, I like that. I think pretty much to a number, every candidate has talked a little bit about that, mm-hmm, so far that I've read, and I haven't read that much yet, and it's early, yep, so there's not a whole lot of information available out there, but I would say that's a fair statement overall. But what's really, really interesting is that I've seen I don't want to say a sea change, but I want to say that there's a little bit of an attitude adjustment that has occurred over the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. Because I think when I first got here, one of the things that I thought was like, wow, well, this community seems to be growing at an exponential rate, but they're looking inward. Right. They're looking inside for solutions. And I think the solutions are from the people who are coming in, right, from other places because of the experience that they're bringing, et cetera, so forth. Right. And if it were not for that exponential growth, that would not hold true. Uh-huh. If it was a slow growth, I think there would be more of a natural occurrence there, like those people would slowly get involved and whatnot. Right. With our growth, there needs to be a definite effort of outreach there. Right. And I like the way you said that again, because you helped me get to one that we used last time, which was a great part of the interview. Is we both agreed that once you learn that you don't know what you don't know, right, is when you're ready to hit that like growth mentality. Like you've recognized that I don't know everything, and I need help.
Yeah, I think it was when we met previously that I mentioned that one of my prouder accomplishments growing up was I'm an Eagle Scout.
Mm-hmm.
And my scoutmaster, who was also neighbor 5 doors down and my high school guidance counselor, he had a lot of influence on my life, and I didn't realize how much until I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things he just always repeated, his mantra was use your resources.
Mm-hmm.
We would ask a question, we'd be on a camp out and say, hey, where do we do this? Or how do I go about this? And he'd say, use your resources. And it took a while to figure that out, but I still kind of live by that now.
Yeah.
If I don't know something, and there are a lot of things I don't know, we have resources.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've mentioned new residents that we can look to. There are other people on the council. We have a city staff that can be accessed and referenced for these. We have friends or acquaintances that we know from just being around the town. We have people that we grew up with. I mean, the world can be the resources, and I think you hit on it when you said we used to look inwardly, but we're starting to look outwardly.
Right.
I think we're using our resources more wisely.
I agree. I think that's a fair assessment. I think there's still a lot of opportunity there.
Right.
I mean, a tremendous amount. Let's say 95% amount. I mean, there's a big opportunity there because I do not think that the city in general, and this is not meant as a knock on anybody, it's just generally speaking, there's not enough of that. There's not enough outreach. There's not enough effort to try to get people involved. Let me asterisk that. Effective effort. Because I think that there's some people trying some things that's just not working yet.
Well, and I think that's almost to be expected to a point. I mean, I said Leander has a small town feel. 20 years ago, Leander was not much more than a small town.
Right.
Now we're a thriving city that's going to be over 100,000 people in just a few short years.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a vast difference between the mindset of the small town I lived in Ohio
Mm-hmm.
and Austin or Houston or any city. Just like there's a vast mindset of difference between when we had 7,000 people and now when we have 80. And I think that's evolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are going to be more accommodating to that right away, but others are going to take some time to get used to that change.
Yeah, and I think the change is inevitable.
The
change is inevitable.
But it's still human nature
Absolutely.
to fear change.
Absolutely. I completely 100% concur. And I know exactly what that means. Mm-hmm. But again, here I would say, and I would encourage you as a candidate, and as you know, we talk about this a little bit when we're on the councils, so we have to encourage people to understand the complexities of the issues that we face. Right. It's not a simple, typically, and this is not intended to shadow anything at all, it's not a yes or no answer. Mm-hmm. It's far more complex than that. It's far more complex. And then you have to deal with the fact that, you know, unfortunately, there have been decisions made in the past that kick the can down the road, for lack of better terms. And so now you have to deal with those things. You have to address them, because if you don't, well, we're at the end of the road. There's nowhere else to kick the can.
Wow, I'm going to tie so many things together. That was just a great lead-in for this, and no, that wasn't planned. But you're right. In a lot of cases, human nature is, I don't fully understand this, so I'm going to procrastinate on it. Well, in a situation like city government, sometimes that procrastination becomes, I'll let the next group deal with this, or we'll deal with this next year. Let's table it and get onto something else that that I know and I'm comfortable with. Mm-hmm. So that all leads back to that, using your resources to learn things from the experts. There's some areas I'm an expert in. There are a lot of areas I'm not an expert in.
Right.
I'll be the first to admit I'm not a water expert. But I know some people that are, and I talk to them about it to learn and educate myself. Where was I going with? There was somewhere else I was going to go.
That's okay. Well, that's one of those issues. I mean, if and again, I try not to get too deep into issue-based conversation, because I want people to get a sense of who you are. Much more than,
and that was just an example,
what you're talking about. But it's a good example, and I think it kind of, I hope to the people who are watching this, kind of demonstrates some of that conversational experience at play. Because when it comes to the water issue, and for people who may are new to Leander, there's in Central Texas, there's an issue with water. It's just, I don't want to say there's not enough to go around because no one really knows that for sure. But there is an issue with the way that we use water, the way that water is distributed, the conservation of the water resources that we have. Then there's also the expense that is incurred. There was a period of time historically where Leander was well-based. People had wells, and they would just go dig a deeper well to get more water. Well, you can't do that anymore. You haven't been able to do that for quite some time. And as we're growing and as we're expanding, that becomes a challenge because you have to find different ways to use the resources that you have. One of the things that comes up in the water conversation is the recycling and the use of recycled water, which you can't use it for everything, but there's certain things that you can apply it to. Well, that creates a whole new group of issues that you have to deal with because you're not set up to do that inherently.
Right.
The city's not constructed like that. So you have to fix things, you have to rework things, and that takes time.
Right.
I am, for one, happy to see a lot of the attention that has finally been put to those issues. Again, a lot of work to be done.
Right.
But I think at least we're headed in the right direction. We're starting to address those things in a manner that is a little bit more holistic.
Yep, and you just mentioned the sea change going on, and I think a lot of that still ties back to the meteoric growth that we've had here. Earlier, you also mentioned the Charter Review Committee. That was probably one of the more forward-thinking things that was ever done in the city, was to set that up on a periodic review. Because, well, you just spent months working with that group to look at things that we should propose changing because we're different now. To be real honest with you, one of the most frustrating things about my day job is when I'm trying to do consulting with customers, and I'll ask a question about why they're doing something, and the response is, that's how we've always done it.
Yeah.
So by having a scheduled review of that charter, that keeps us from falling into the, we have to do it this way because we always had mentality. It gives an opportunity to evolve the document driving the city with the way the city's changing.
Yeah, I would agree. And I was very happy to have spent the time that I spent on the Charter Review Committee. To be completely transparent, I would have preferred more time, to be honest. I'm not saying that it can't be done in the time frame that it was. And we actually suggested a change to the charter because the charter indicates that you're supposed to be on that committee for 6 months.
Right.
So we looked at the reality of that. This is a good example of that. We looked at the reality of that. And the reality is, well, could you set up a charter committee to run for 6 months? Absolutely. But I think you would have to say, we are setting up this charter review committee for the next 6 months in order to facilitate a thorough examination of the charter, for instance. In this case, you're basically taking legacy issues because there were issues that were not addressed in the last charter review, and we start with that. So you already kind of have a list when you're starting. Start with that list, talk about some of the things that need to be discussed, and then some other things that you want to be discussed. Again, here in our conversation, we've talked about a little bit about that. There's like 13, there's 13 charter propositions on the ballot this time around. My last episode actually covered that, so you can go back and look at that. But all 13 are meant to really address the current reality of governance in Leander.
Right.
They're fixes. They're not wholesale changes. They're just adjustments to the reality of how things work today.
Right. As I read through some of those, I see them as tweaks.
Yeah, that's basically what they are. They're tweaks. They're tweaks to say, okay, yeah, that's how it works right now, to your point. Like, this is how we do it right now. But in reality, that's not the most efficient way to do it. So let's make these changes to gain some efficiency in the way that we govern our city.
Right, and that's one of the things that, in my experience, illustrates a forward-thinking city versus one who is stuck in the established way of thinking, is the willingness to examine and modify their process.
Yeah, and again, we've touched on it a couple of times. I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I do think that that's starting to happen. I think it's starting to happen. I think that should benefit the city in the long run. And we don't know what we don't know. So whether that's the right or the wrong decision to make, I mean, time will tell. And that's always the conversation.
Right.
That's always the conversation. The decisions that we're making, are these the best decisions that we can make right now or not? And I think a lot of people need, when they think about that, when they think about candidates and they think about the way they want their city to grow and mature and develop and succeed, because you want your city to be successful.
Right.
You need to be forward thinking. I don't think you have a choice. I mean, it's good to learn from the past. We talk about it in my environment. We always talk about lessons learned.
Right.
So it's one of the review points that we have when we go back and we look at projects. What were the lessons learned? What did we learn from this project that we can apply to the subsequent project? And that's a difficult process.
It is, because there's a lot of introspection there that goes into, why did I do it that way? Is it just because I'm stuck in a pattern, or am I missing something?
I like to say, is there a there there? That's I get quoted on that all the time. I didn't make it up. I just say it because I'm always looking for that. There's a lot of people who talk about this, and I'm a fan of Simon Sinek. I don't know if you know who Simon Sinek is. He's kind of a sales guru, psychology, philosophy kind of guy. Okay, and he does this whole thing on the why of a company. Very much recommend this to you.
Yeah.
Look for Simon Sinek on YouTube and his TED Talk where he talks about the why. Okay,
is this the one that said ask 5 times why?
No, it's not ask 5 times why. It's not that one. But he basically, shorthand here, he covers the why of product and company development, and he centers on Apple. So he uses Apple as his primary example of a company that is very focused on the why, why they do things. So that's part of the conversation, in my opinion. Like, why are we doing this? And then as we are making that decision, all the things that are informing us, I like to add, is there a there there? Like, we're listening to something, we're asking for additional information. Is there anything there that we can use and apply to the why?
I've got you. That makes sense. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. It just depends on what you're listening to or what you're talking about. But I think you can always glean some information in any conversation.
I agree completely. And going back to using the resources, and again, I'm not trying to harp on that, but it's kind of central to the way I think now. To consider myself, or for anyone to be honest, to consider themselves to know everything is at best arrogant, and quite honestly, at worst, ignorant is probably the word that comes to mind when I think about how I used to act. And I'm speaking of me, nobody out there. But to think that there's not something you can learn from everybody you meet, you're missing out.
Yeah, I would agree. I call that willful ignorance, but that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, I don't know if I even want to go there.
Well, we should. We should have that conversation. But anyway, thank you so much for your time.
Yep.
You've been awesome twice, okay? So, I mean, this was a really good conversation, and the last one was as well. Tell everybody how they can find out a little bit more about you and your campaign.
Sure. So you can go to my website, HanesForLeander.com. That's HANESFOR, Leander. And you can find out everything there about my platform, my links to social media, really anything that you might want to know about my campaign, why I'm running, what I stand for is available there. So I'd encourage everyone to do that. Feel free to email me with questions you might have at info@HanesForLeander. And just remember, you can believe in Steve.
Very good. My guest today has been Steve Haynes, candidate for Place 3 on this May's election platform, or ballots, I guess I should say. It's his platform, but it's a ballot. You know what I'm talking about. Thank you again. I appreciate your time, and again, you've been doubly generous. So I appreciate that, and best of luck to you.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. See ya.